A security camera captured everything. The person who took her walked right past it. Across the parking lot. Back toward the building where she had lived. In every single frame of that footage, a fence post was perfectly positioned over their face. Not once. Not twice. In every frame, that was 19 years ago. They have never been found. A deputy put two men in the back of his patrol car 3 months apart. Both times he said he dropped them at a convenience store. Neither man was ever seen on any camera at any convenience store in the area. Neither man was ever seen again. The deputy was fired for lying. He was never charged. A 5-year-old girl disappeared from her bed in the middle of the night. The back door was propped open with a cinder block. The people who were supposed to know what happened have given investigators 4 different versions of the same night. A 2-year-old boy vanished through a window. The screen was cut from the inside. 10 cases. 1 state. The same questions have been unanswered for decades. Florida keeps its secrets. And the people who know the truth are still out there. The figure steps out of Jennifer Kess's car, crosses the Huntington on the Green parking lot, and walks back in the direction of the Mosaic at Millenia. The security camera records every step. And in every single frame, a decorative iron fence post is positioned directly over their face. The camera photographs the scene every 3 seconds. For the post to cover the face in every frame, the walking speed, the stride length, and the exact moment each photograph fires all have to align perfectly, every time. It is either the most improbable coincidence in the history of surveillance footage, or it is someone who knew where that camera was, knew its timing interval, and calibrated their walk accordingly. That would require prior reconnaissance. That would mean this was planned. Jennifer Kess was 24 years old. She worked as a finance manager at a timeshare company and lived at the Mosaic at Millenia, a complex in Orlando that had been marketed as upscale living for young professionals. She was organized and consistent in her routines. She called her parents every single day. She called her boyfriend Rob every night before bed. She had just returned from a vacation in St. Croix with Rob the day before she disappeared. On the night of January 23 she spoke to Rob at 10:00 p.m., said she was tired, said they would talk the next day. That was the last confirmed contact anyone had with her. The next morning she did not call. She did not arrive at work. Her manager tried calling. Her co-workers tried. Every call went to voicemail. By noon her parents were driving down from Tampa. They arrived at her condo around 3 p.m. and let themselves in with a spare key. The apartment appeared entirely normal. The bed was made. A work outfit was laid out across it as if she had been planning her morning. Makeup was arranged on the bathroom counter. The sink area was damp, suggesting the bathroom had been used recently. But her purse, cell phone, keys, and car were all gone. And she had never made it to the office. On January 26 her black Chevy Malibu was found at Huntington on the Green, approximately 1 mile from the Mosaic. The car was parked neatly, locked, and had been wiped down. No substantial fingerprints. No DNA on the steering wheel. Her cell phone was not inside. Her purse was gone. What was left behind was her iPod, a DVD player, and her work briefcase. If the motive was robbery, the wrong items were taken. The FBI analyzed the security footage from Huntington on the Green. The figure walking away from Jennifer's car was estimated at between 5 feet 3 inches and 5 feet 5 inches in height, wearing light-colored clothing consistent with painter's whites or khaki work attire, and walked with a slight outward splay to their feet. They did not run. They moved at the pace of someone who had every right to be in that parking lot. A bloodhound named Bo was brought to Huntington on the Green and given Jennifer's scent from the vehicle. Bo tracked it across the parking lot and back in the direction of the Mosaic, following it all the way to the stairs of Jennifer's own building. The person who drove her car to a secondary location walked back to where they had started. They returned to the scene and disappeared into it. The mosaic at Millennia was mid-construction at the time of Jennifer's disappearance, converting from rental units to privately owned condominiums. Workers were present throughout the complex, some living in empty units off the books with no formal background checks. Security gates had been propped open to allow construction vehicles to pass without stopping. Jennifer had told friends she felt uncomfortable being watched by some of the workers on site. She told Rob directly that one of them had shown aggressive attention toward her. The question investigators keep returning to is the simplest one. Why bring the car back at all? A victim's vehicle is evidence. The rational decision is to distance it from the crime as quickly and as far as possible. Instead, someone drove it 1 mile, parked it carefully, cleaned it thoroughly, and walked back toward the mosaic past a surveillance camera. That is not how a stranger acting impulsively behaves. That is how someone behaves who knows the environment, knows they belong in it, and knows they will not draw attention walking through it. 3 theories have defined this investigation. A stranger who happened to be present and got extraordinary luck with the fence post timing. A construction worker who had studied Jennifer's routine and chose his moment with precision. Someone Jennifer knew who had direct access to the building and understood its security gaps. None of the 3 has been confirmed. In recent years, modern genealogical DNA analysis has been applied to evidence from the case. Investigators have publicly stated the suspect pool has been meaningfully narrowed. The case is no longer considered cold by those actively working it. No arrest has been made. Jennifer Kess has been missing for nearly 20 years. No remains have ever been found. The person who walked away from that parking lot has never been publicly identified. If you want to be here the moment this case moves forward, subscribe now and turn on notifications. We cover every development the moment it is confirmed. At 1:12 in the afternoon on January 12, 2004, Deputy Stephen Calkins radio dispatch and requested a background check on a man named Terrence Williams. That radio call exists in the official record. It is time-stamped. It is documented. And it is the detail that proves everything Calkins said about that day was a lie. Felipe Santos was 23 years old. He was an undocumented immigrant from Mexico working construction in Naples, Florida, sending money home to his family. On the morning of October 14, 2003, he was involved in a minor traffic accident in North Naples. A fender bender. Nothing serious. But Felipe had no driver's license, and he knew that any encounter with law enforcement could end in deportation. Deputy Stephen Calkins responded to the scene. What happened next exists only in Calkins's own account, which changed depending on who was asking and when. According to Calkins, he placed Felipe in the back of his patrol car but then had a change of heart. He felt sorry for him. So instead of booking him, instead of following standard procedure, he drove Felipe to a Circle K convenience store and let him go. No arrest. No paperwork. No documentation of any kind. Felipe Santos was never seen again. His family reported him missing. But the reality of being undocumented in America in 2003 meant the investigation went nowhere. The assumption was that he had simply returned to Mexico. His name sat on a list that no one examined too closely. 3 months passed. Terrence Williams was 27 years old. He was an American citizen, a father of 4 who had recently moved from Tennessee to Naples to be closer to his mother Marcia. On January 12, 2004, his 1984 Cadillac either broke down or was pulled over near the Naples Memorial Garden Cemetery. Deputy Stephen Calkins responded. This time, unlike with Felipe Santos, there were witnesses. Cemetery workers at the site watched the entire encounter. They saw Calkins pull Terrence over, pat him down, and place him in the back of the patrol car. They watched Calkins move the Cadillac off the road into a parking spot. And then they watched him drive away with Terrence in the back seat. Terrence Williams was never seen again. When Terrence's family began asking questions, when Marcia demanded to know where her son was, Calkins denied everything. He filed a report stating that he had found the Cadillac abandoned at 12:15 in the afternoon. Just a car on the side of the road with no driver. He called for a tow. He never saw the driver. That was his account. Then investigators pulled the dispatch records. At 1:12 p.m., nearly an hour after Calkins claims he found an empty, abandoned vehicle, he radioed dispatch and ran a background check on Terrence Williams. And here is the detail that matters. He provided a specific birth date. Not Terrence's correct date of birth. A date Terrence had used during a previous arrest. That is not information you find in a car with no driver. That is information you obtain by speaking to someone, by questioning them, by having them in front of you. The dispatch record proved Calkins had not found an abandoned vehicle. He had found Terrence Williams and he had interrogated him. Confronted with this, Calkins changed his story. He now admitted that yes, he had encountered Terrence, had placed him in the patrol car, but had felt bad about the situation and driven him to a Circle K rather than processing him formally. The same story he told about Felipe Santos. Word for word. The same convenience store. The same spontaneous act of charity. 2 men. 3 months apart. The identical explanation. Investigators pulled surveillance footage from every Circle K in the area. They checked the dates. They checked the times. Neither Felipe Santos nor Terrence Williams appeared on any of it. Phone records showed that Calkins never made the calls to the Circle K that he claimed he had made to check on the men after dropping them off. The Cadillac key was found on the ground near where the car was parked. If Terrence had voluntarily walked away from his own vehicle, he would have taken the key with him or at minimum put it somewhere deliberate. A key dropped on the pavement is not abandonment. It is staging. Cemetery workers also noted that Calkins had moved the Cadillac from a position that was not blocking traffic to one that was, and then used the traffic obstruction as the justification for calling the tow truck. He manufactured the reason to remove the car. In the dispatch recording from that day, Calkins referred to the Cadillac as a homey Cadillac and made a comment to the dispatcher that maybe the driver was out there in the cemetery. At the time it likely sounded like dark workplace humor. In the context of what followed, it reads differently. Calkins took 3 separate polygraph tests in connection with the 2 disappearances. The first was inconclusive. The second indicated he was being truthful. The third indicated deception. He was fired from the Collier County Sheriff's Office, not for murder, not for anything connected to the 2 men who vanished after getting into his patrol car, but for lying during an internal investigation. He was never charged with a criminal offense. Marcia Williams spent years fighting for answers. She eventually filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Calkins. In 2020 the case went to arbitration. The arbitrator ruled in Calkins's favor. The case was dismissed. And Marcia Williams was ordered to pay Stephen Calkins's legal fees, more than $5,000. A mother who spent nearly 2 decades searching for her son was required by a legal process to write a check to the man she believes took him. 2 men got into the back of the same deputy's patrol car 3 months apart. 2 men were never seen again. 2 families have spent over 20 years with no answers. And the man at the center of both disappearances has never faced a criminal charge. The first version of Misty Crossland's story was simple. She went to sleep. She woke up. Haley was gone. The back door was open. A cinder block was propping it. That was the account she gave on the night of February 9, 2009, and it was the account she repeated in the days that followed. It was also not the account she gave years later, when she was sitting in a prison cell and the story changed in a way that made the first version impossible. Haley Ann Marie Cummings was 5 years old. Blonde hair, brown eyes, 39 pounds. She had Turner syndrome, a genetic condition that would have required ongoing medical care throughout her life. She was in kindergarten. Her father Ronald called her his princess. She lived with Ronald, her 3-year-old brother Junior, and Ronald's 17-year-old girlfriend Misty Crossland in a single wide trailer in a mobile home park called Hermit's Cove in Satsuma, a small unincorporated community in Putnam County. Ronald was 25 and worked the night shift as a crane operator at a PDM bridge job site. On the night of February 9 he was at work, which meant Misty was alone in that trailer with 2 young children who were not hers. The temperature that night dropped into the low 40s. A heavy mist settled over the area. Inside the trailer, according to Misty, she put both children to bed around 8 p.m. and went to sleep herself around 10 p.m. She says she woke up at approximately 3:00 a.m. to use the bathroom. When she came back to the bedroom, Haley's bed was empty. The back door was wide open. Propped against it, holding it open, was a cinder block. Misty said she checked the trailer, went outside calling Haley's name, found nothing, and called Ronald. Ronald rushed home and called 911 at 3:27 a.m. The Putnam County Sheriff's Office launched a massive search by 4 a.m. Helicopters with thermal imaging swept the surrounding area. Volunteers combed the woods and swamps. The search found nothing. No footprints leading away from the trailer in any direction. No signs of a struggle anywhere on the property. No discarded clothing. No witnesses who saw anyone near the trailer. No vehicle reported leaving the area at that hour. The cinder block sitting in the open doorway was the only physical detail that suggested anything unusual had happened at all. That cinder block is the detail that makes the stranger abduction theory fall apart. If someone broke into that trailer to take a child, their priority is speed and silence. They need to get in, take the child, and leave before anyone wakes up. Propping the door open with a cinder block serves no practical purpose in that scenario. You do not need both hands free to carry a 39-pound child. You do not need the door held open for a return trip. Propping a door open is something a person does when they live in a space and are staging a scene to look like a break-in. The logistics of a genuine stranger abduction in this specific environment also do not hold. The intruder would have to breach a locked back door, move through a small dark trailer without disturbing anything, enter a bedroom where 3 people were sleeping, take one child without waking the other or Misty, carry her back through the trailer, and then take the time to prop the door open with a heavy cinder block before vanishing into the misty night without leaving a single trace. And then there is the sequence of Misty's accounts, which is where the case becomes impossible to resolve cleanly. In her original version she was asleep and woke to find Haley gone. In a later version she mentioned she had been fighting with Ronald on the phone that night. In another version she brought up her cousin Joe Overstreet, saying he had been at the trailer that night and had been acting strangely, and she implied he may have taken Haley as payback over a stolen gun. Joe Overstreet was questioned by investigators, denied any involvement, and according to reports passed a polygraph. He has never been charged. But the most significant version came years later, when Misty was already serving time in prison on unrelated drug charges. In that version, she was not asleep. She said she was hiding under a blanket with Junior while someone took Haley, and she said she heard Haley screaming. That account cannot coexist with the original. Either she was asleep and woke to find the bed empty, or she was awake and hiding while it happened. She cannot have been both. The 5 hours between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. have never been fully accounted for. Phone records confirm that calls were made and received during the evening, including arguments with Ronald. If something happened to Haley earlier in that window, the St. Johns River was nearby. The swamps surrounding Satsuma are vast and largely inaccessible. A 39-pound child could be concealed in 100 different places within a short drive. Ronald Cummings is currently serving a 15-year sentence on drug trafficking charges unrelated to Haley. Misty Crossland is also in prison on drug charges. She has given investigators multiple conflicting accounts across the years and has never provided information that led to Haley. No body has ever been found. No one has ever been charged in connection with her disappearance. Haley would be 21 years old now. Her case remains listed on the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children website. If the cases in this documentary matter to you, the ones where the answers exist somewhere but no one is giving them up, subscribe now. Every case we cover goes this deep. Turn on notifications and do not miss the next one. A federal judge reviewed the recordings that investigators had described as containing confessions. He listened to the same tapes. He read the transcripts that the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office had prepared from those recordings. And he ruled that the transcripts were in many cases pure fantasy. That the recordings were largely inaudible and unintelligible. That investigators had projected guilt onto static, ambient household noise, and the ordinary sounds of two people living in their home. He dismissed all charges. He threw out the entire case. But by then, the transcripts had already been leaked to the media. The allegations had already been broadcast to millions of people. And no court ruling was going to undo what had been said publicly about Steve and Marlene Eisenberg. Sabrina Eisenberg was 5 months old. She was sleeping in her crib in the nursery of her family's ranch-style home in Valrico, a quiet suburb east of Tampa. Her parents Steve and Marlene had 3 children, 8-year-old William, 4-year-old Monica, and Sabrina, who was still in that newborn phase where her entire world was her crib, her parents, and the soft glow of a nightlight. The family also had a dog named Brownie. On the night of November 23, 1997, Marlene put Sabrina to bed around midnight, checked on her the way parents do, and went to sleep. The house was quiet. Steve was asleep. The older children were in their rooms. When Marlene walked to the kitchen just after 6:30 in the morning, she found the door from the kitchen to the garage standing open. When she looked into the garage, the large roll-up door that opened to the street was also wide open. She ran to the nursery. The crib was empty. She called 911 at 6:42 a.m. Marlene later admitted she had left the kitchen-to-garage door unlocked the night before. She had been doing laundry and forgotten to lock it. That side door became the presumed point of entry. But she maintained that the large roll-up garage door, the one that opens to the street, had been closed when the family went to bed. If that is true, someone opened it during the night. From the outside or from the inside. The investigation never established which. The search that followed found no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints beyond those belonging to the family, no fibers, no witnesses in the surrounding neighborhood, and no one who had heard or seen anything during the night. Brownie, the family dog, had not barked. The neighbors' dogs had not barked either. The Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office shifted its focus to the parents early and never shifted it back. They obtained authorization to bug the Eisenberg home. For months, investigators recorded thousands of hours of audio from inside the house. They claimed the recordings contained Steve saying the baby is dead and buried and that it was the cocaine. They claimed Marlene said they needed to keep their story straight. These claims were leaked to the media before any court had reviewed the actual recordings. The coverage was immediate and damaging. In 1999, a federal grand jury indicted Steve and Marlene on charges of conspiracy and making false statements to law enforcement. The case rested almost entirely on those wiretap recordings. The indictment did not allege murder. It alleged a cover-up. When the case reached a federal judge and he reviewed the same tapes the prosecution had described as containing confessions, he found something different. The recordings were largely inaudible. The transcripts did not reflect what was actually on the tapes. All charges were dismissed. A neighbor named Scott Middleton, who was a former police officer, told reporters that Steve had seemed too calm when he came to his door the morning Sabrina disappeared. At a press conference, Marlene briefly smiled, a momentary expression in a moment of unimaginable stress, and observers treated it as evidence of guilt. These behavioral interpretations are not forensic evidence. They are not reliable indicators of anything except that people in shock do not always behave the way others expect. Sabrina's pediatrician testified at the time that she was a healthy baby with documented regular checkups. Medical claims made by the prosecution that suggested neglect or abuse were directly contradicted by those records. Years after the disappearance, a woman came forward claiming to be Sabrina. DNA testing was conducted. She was not. Steve and Marlene Eisenberg still live in Florida. Every year on Sabrina's birthday they release a statement. They have never stopped searching. Sabrina would be 27 years old now. The case remains officially open. Forensic investigators who examined the bedroom window at Melinda Duckett's apartment in Leesburg determined that the screen had been cut from the inside. The direction of the cut and the orientation of the fibers in the screen material both indicated the blade had moved from inside the room outward. A person standing outside a window cannot make that cut. Which means whoever cut that screen was standing inside Trenton Duckett's room. Trenton was 2 years old. Sandy blonde hair, brown eyes, barely verbal, completely dependent on the adults around him. He was at the center of a bitter custody dispute between his mother Melinda Duckett, who was 21, and his father Josh Duckett. There was an additional shadow over this family that is difficult to ignore. Trenton's paternal grandfather, his father's father, was James Jimmy Duckett, a former police officer who was on death row in Florida for the rape and murder of an 11-year-old girl. Whether that family history had any bearing on what happened to Trenton has never been established. But it is part of the documented record. On the evening of August 27, 2006, Melinda put Trenton to bed in his room at approximately 7 p.m. Shortly after, 2 male friends arrived at the apartment. The 3 of them settled into the living room and put on a film, Saw 2, a loud and graphically violent horror movie. Trenton was asleep down the hall. At approximately 9:00 p.m. Melinda went to check on him. The bed was empty. The window was open. The screen had been cut. She called 911 at 9:05 p.m. K-9 units and helicopters with thermal imaging were deployed. No witnesses reported seeing anyone carrying a child. No physical evidence was found outside the window. No footprints. No fibers. Nothing. The 2 friends who had been in the living room that evening said they heard nothing unusual during the time they were watching the film. They noticed nothing different about Melinda's behavior when she came back into the room. The film was loud. The hall was down a corridor from the living room. Both of those facts are relevant to whatever theory you apply to that night. On September 8, 2006, less than 2 weeks after Trenton disappeared, Melinda appeared on a nationally televised program hosted by Nancy Grace. Grace questioned her aggressively about her whereabouts and the inconsistencies in her account. Melinda appeared defensive and evasive throughout the interview. To viewers watching at home, the impression was not favorable. The interview ended. Melinda went home. The next day, September 9, 2006, Melinda Duckett drove to her grandparents' home, went into a back room, and shot herself in the chest. She left a suicide note. In it she expressed her love for Trenton. She described her anger at the media coverage and the public accusations. She said she missed him. What the note did not contain was a confession. It did not say where Trenton was. It did not explain what had happened to him. It did not point investigators in any direction. It simply ended. The absence of a confession in that note is one of the most debated elements of this case. The prevailing theory is that Melinda's suicide was driven by guilt, that she knew what had happened to Trenton and could not sustain the pressure of the investigation closing in. But if that were true, why not confess? Why not give the family some form of closure? Why not provide a location? Some investigators argue the note is consistent with someone who genuinely did not know where Trenton was. Someone who was grieving, overwhelmed, and broken by the accusation itself rather than by the weight of a secret. Nancy Grace faced significant public criticism in the aftermath of Melinda's death. Critics argued that the aggressive nature of the interview had pushed a vulnerable young woman past a breaking point. Grace maintained she was asking questions that needed to be asked. No body has ever been found. No confession exists. Trenton Duckett would be 20 years old now. The cut screen remains the single most significant piece of physical evidence in the case. And it points inward. Before he died, Paul Branch told his wife what had happened to Amy Billig. Branch was a former member of the Pagans Motorcycle Club. He was dying and apparently decided he did not want to take everything he knew with him. His widow later came forward and described what he had told her. The gang had picked Amy up. They had taken her to a party. She had been given drugs. She had died. They had disposed of her body in the Everglades. And then Branch said something that changed the weight of his entire account. He described a scar on her abdomen. An appendectomy scar, in a specific location. That detail had never been released to the public. It had been deliberately withheld from all media coverage as held-back evidence, the kind of detail investigators reserve precisely to evaluate the credibility of confessions and tips. Paul Branch had no documented connection to Amy Billig. He had no legitimate access to law enforcement files. The only way he could know about that scar is if he had seen her body. Amy Billig was 17 years old in March 1974. Brown hair, brown eyes, 5 feet 5 inches tall, approximately 110 pounds. She had a distinctive appendectomy scar on her abdomen. She was artistic, she played the flute, she wrote poetry, and she fit perfectly into the bohemian culture of Coconut Grove in Miami, where she lived. This was not the Miami of luxury hotels and nightclubs. This was the Grove of the early 1970s, counterculture, artistic, communal. People played music on street corners. Hitchhiking was not considered dangerous. It was how you got around if you did not have a car. You stuck out your thumb and someone from the community picked you up. Trust was the operating assumption. On the afternoon of March 5, 1974, Amy had a simple errand. She needed to walk to her father's art gallery nearby to borrow $2 so she could buy a blazer she had seen at a local shop. She was going to have lunch with her dad. She left the house, walked to a main road near Poinciana Street, and stuck out her thumb. Construction workers in the area watched her standing on the side of the road. They watched a dark-colored vehicle, possibly a van or a large sedan, pull over. They watched Amy get into it. No one got a plate. No one thought anything of it. This was the Grove. This was what people did. Amy Billig was never seen again. Her mother Susan Billig refused to accept it. She plastered Coconut Grove with missing person flyers. She walked the streets every day showing Amy's photograph to anyone who would stop long enough to look. She became a fixture of the neighborhood, a mother whose entire existence had collapsed into a single question. Somewhere along the way the search became her life. Amy's camera was found months after her disappearance at a highway rest stop near Wildwood on the Florida Turnpike, 250 miles north of Miami. Most of the film inside was overexposed and could not be developed usefully. One image was recoverable, a white van or truck parked in front of a wall covered in vines. The location was never identified. The turnpike runs north out of Florida toward Georgia and beyond. If Amy had been moved out of state, that highway is the route. The phone calls to Susan began shortly after Amy disappeared. A man's voice told her Amy was alive and being held by the Outlaws, one of the most notorious outlaw motorcycle clubs in the country. He described Amy being trafficked and abused. He gave no locations, no proof, nothing concrete. He just called. He called again days later. He called weeks later. He called for 21 years. In 1995 the FBI finally traced the calls. The voice belonged to Henry Johnson Blair, a United States Customs agent who had inserted himself into the Amy Billig investigation early on, presenting himself as someone with connections who could help. He had been Susan's supposed ally. For 2 decades he had been the man calling in the middle of the night to describe what he claimed was happening to her daughter. He was charged with harassment. He claimed obsessive-compulsive disorder and alcoholism as explanations. He denied any knowledge of what had actually happened to Amy. He was never charged with kidnapping or murder. Amy's diary, recovered early in the investigation, contained a reference to a man she called Hank. She had written that Hank scared her. She wrote that Hank wanted to take her to South America. Henry Johnson Blair's nickname was Hank. Shortly after Amy's disappearance, Blair was stationed in South America. He was never charged in connection with her disappearance. Which brings the case back to Paul Branch and the scar. 2 competing explanations exist. Amy was taken by bikers within hours of getting into that car in 1974, died at a party that same day, and her body was disposed of in the Everglades, with Blair spending 2 decades tormenting Susan with fabricated information because of some psychological compulsion that has never been fully explained. Or Blair was more directly involved than he admitted, and the calls were not the behavior of an obsessed bystander but of someone who knew what had happened to Amy because he was part of it. Susan Billig died in 2005 at the age of 74. She spent 31 years searching. She never found out what happened to her daughter. Amy Billig would be in her late 60s now. No confirmed remains have ever been recovered. No one has ever been charged with her disappearance. The case has been open for 50 years. When investigators processed Tiffany Daniels's gray 1999 Toyota 4Runner at the Park West parking lot on Pensacola Beach, they found 2 fingerprints on the driver's side door handle. Those prints did not match Tiffany. They did not match her boyfriend, her roommate, or any investigator who had touched the vehicle during the initial response. When the prints were run through available databases, there were no hits. Someone whose identity has never been established touched the driver's side door handle of Tiffany Daniels's car. That is a confirmed forensic fact. Everything else in this case is a question. Tiffany was 25 years old. She worked as a theater technician at Pensacola State College, the person behind the scenes who built the sets, hung the lights, and made sure the actors had a functional world to perform in. She had tattoos of plants growing from seeds on the tops of both feet, a symbol she had chosen to represent growth and transformation. She was a pescatarian, avoiding meat but eating fish, a specific dietary choice that matters later in this case. Her friends described her as a free spirit, but she was also reliable and responsible. She showed up. She did the work. She did not disappear without explanation. On the morning of August 12, 2013, her boyfriend noticed she seemed distant and sad, not herself. When she went to work at the college that day, her supervisor noticed the same thing. At 4:43 p.m. she clocked out early, told her supervisor she needed a few days off to take care of some things, and left. She went home briefly after that. Her roommate heard the door open and close but did not see her. And then Tiffany was gone. At 7:51 p.m. a toll camera on the Bob Sykes Bridge recorded her 4Runner heading onto Pensacola Beach. The bridge is the only vehicular access point to the barrier island. That timestamp placed her on the beach. After 7:51 p.m. her phone stopped pinging cell towers. No further camera captured her vehicle in motion. No witnesses reported seeing her. For 8 days her car sat in the Park West parking lot at the far end of Pensacola Beach near Fort Pickens. A parking area that is isolated and dark at night but regularly used by beachgoers during the day. For 8 days, through regular visitor traffic, no one reported it. On August 20, a person who recognized the vehicle flagged it to authorities. Inside were her bicycle, her purse, her wallet containing her ID and credit cards, her cell phone, a gallon jug of water, and a jar of peanut butter. The car was parked facing the wrong direction, against the flow of traffic. Not consistent with someone who parks carefully, consistent with someone unfamiliar with the lot or in a hurry. One day earlier, on August 19, a witness had reported seeing a man standing at the rear of the 4Runner with the tailgate raised, as if loading or unloading something. He was wearing only red shorts. No shirt. No shoes. He was never identified. The water and peanut butter have been a central point of discussion in every analysis of this case. A gallon jug of water is heavy and bulky. It is not something grabbed impulsively. Combined with calorie-dense shelf-stable peanut butter, these are supplies someone brings when they are planning to be somewhere for an extended period. They are not what someone packs when they intend to walk into the Gulf of Mexico. A waitress at a restaurant in Metairie, Louisiana, west of Pensacola along Interstate 10, later reported serving a woman who closely resembled Tiffany. The woman asked a specific question, whether a soup on the menu was made with fish broth or chicken broth. That is not a common dietary question. It is exactly the kind of question a pescatarian asks. The sighting was investigated and never confirmed. 3 theories have been examined. Suicide is contradicted by the supplies. Foul play is supported by the unidentified fingerprints, the wrong direction parking, and the man in red shorts. Voluntary disappearance is contradicted by leaving behind her wallet, her ID, and her credit cards, none of which a person starting over can afford to leave behind. None of the 3 theories fits the evidence without leaving something unexplained. Tiffany Daniels has been missing for over 11 years. Her family has never stopped looking. The case remains open. If you want to be notified the moment any of these cases develops, subscribe now and turn on notifications. You will not find coverage this thorough anywhere else. At 1:15 in the morning on June 20, 2012, the TT Zion came ashore on Fort Lauderdale Beach directly in front of the Elbow Room, a well-known beachfront bar. The navigation lights were on, red and green running lights, white stern light, all glowing in the pre-dawn darkness. The engines were running, not at full throttle but idling, still churning, still burning fuel. On the center console sat Guma Aguiar's wallet and his cell phone, both untouched. On the deck lay his gray t-shirt and his flip-flops. The boat had come home. Guma had not. Guma Aguiar was 35 years old. He had co-founded an energy company that made him worth over $100 million. He was a major philanthropist in the Jewish community, donating millions to Israeli causes. He had a wife named Jamie, 4 young children, and a waterfront mansion in Rio Vista, one of Fort Lauderdale's most exclusive neighborhoods. From the outside his life looked like the definition of success. On the inside it was fracturing. Guma suffered from severe bipolar disorder and had been involuntarily committed to psychiatric facilities more than once in the months leading up to June 2012. He had developed an intense conviction that he had a messianic destiny connected to Israel. He had named his 31-foot Jupiter Center console the TT Zion as a direct expression of that belief. He was in the middle of a public legal battle with his mother and his uncle Thomas Kaplan, a billionaire, who were suing him and claiming he was mentally unfit to manage his own fortune. His marriage was deteriorating. His mental state was in serious decline. On the evening of June 19, home security cameras captured Guma pacing on his back patio in bare feet, wearing the gray t-shirt that would later be found on the deck of his boat. He appeared agitated and restless. A small craft advisory was in effect that night, 20-knot gusts, 4 to 5 foot swells. Conditions that experienced boaters know to wait out. Around 7:30 p.m. Guma boarded the TT Zion, which was docked directly behind his house. He told no one where he was going. He filed no float plan. He untied the lines and motored out into the intracoastal heading east toward the Atlantic. The boat was equipped with GPS tracking and investigators later pulled the data. It showed Guma heading east offshore at speed, not cruising along the coast but going directly out into open ocean. At approximately 7:54 p.m. the GPS registered a sharp erratic turn. The speed dropped. What followed was a looping drifting pattern, the kind of movement a vessel makes when no one is actively steering it. For the next several hours the boat drifted. Then it came back to shore on its own. The kill switch is the detail that most complicates the accidental man overboard theory. Modern boats like the TT Zion are equipped with a safety lanyard that attaches to the captain. If the captain goes overboard, the lanyard pulls free and the engines shut off automatically. When the TT Zion beached itself, the engines were still running. Either Guma had not attached the lanyard before leaving the dock, or it malfunctioned, or it had been deliberately disconnected. An experienced boater heading into rough seas at night who does not attach his kill switch lanyard is either making a serious oversight or has made a deliberate choice. When investigators examined the boat's onboard electronics, they found that some of the GPS tracking data was corrupted or missing. Whether that was caused by saltwater exposure or by deliberate tampering was never established. 3 theories have defined this case. The accidental man overboard theory is undermined by the kill switch absence. The staged disappearance theory, that Guma transferred to another vessel and began a new life, is undermined by the fact that he left behind his wallet, his identification, and his credit cards, without which crossing any international border becomes extraordinarily difficult. The third theory is rooted in his documented mental state. That in the grip of a severe manic episode marked by messianic delusions he sailed into that storm believing he was fulfilling a divine purpose, and that the ocean took him. The United States Coast Guard searched for days. Helicopters, vessels, divers. Nothing was found. In 2015, 3 years after the TT Zion came back without him, Guma Aguiar was declared legally dead. His estate was settled. His children grew up without a father. The mystery was never closed. Leah Hackett came back from the pool dripping wet, without a towel, and went to the bedroom. The bed was empty. She searched the apartment. She went outside and called his name. She called 911 at 4:47 a.m. On that recording, before anyone asked her about the door, she said it herself. "I guess it was unlocked. Yes, it's my fault." Zachary Bernhard was 8 years old. Blonde hair, blue eyes, with small scars on the bridge of his nose and his chin that made him uniquely identifiable if you knew what to look for. He was in 3rd grade. He liked video games and riding his bike. He lived at the Savannah Trace apartment complex in Clearwater with his mother Leah Hackett, a large sprawling complex with hundreds of units and a steady rotation of transient residents who came and went without anyone taking much notice. In the early morning hours of September 11, 2000, Leah said she could not sleep. She said she had been restless and anxious, and around 4 a.m. she made the decision to go for a swim in the complex pool, which was approximately 100 yards from her unit. She left Zachary asleep in the bed. She left the apartment door unlocked because she did not have her key and needed to be able to get back in. She said she was gone for approximately 15 to 20 minutes. She did not bring a towel. When she returned, the bed was empty and Zachary was gone. Clearwater Police, the FBI, K-9 units, helicopters, and dive teams were deployed within hours. They found no signs of forced entry anywhere in the apartment. No fingerprints beyond those belonging to the family. No fibers. Not one neighbor in any of the surrounding units reported hearing a car, a voice, a child, or anything unusual at any point during the night. The search extended to nearby ponds and retention basins. Nothing was found. The possibility that a predator had been watching the complex and saw Leah leave is supported by at least one documented incident. In late 2001, more than a year after Zachary disappeared, a man in a truck pulled up near a group of 3 young boys at the same complex and attempted to lure them with offers of ice cream. He was scared off before anything happened. The incident confirmed that the area was not free from predatory activity during that period. But that incident came after Zachary was gone, and it produced no connection to his case. Several of Leah's neighbors reported seeing her car move at some point during the night. Leah has denied this consistently for more than 20 years. She says the neighbors were either mistaken or saw someone else's vehicle. She has failed multiple polygraph tests. Investigators have maintained throughout the investigation that they believe she knows more than she has disclosed. No physical evidence has ever connected her to any harm done to Zachary, and no charges have ever been filed. Zachary disappeared on September 11, 2000, exactly 1 year before the terrorist attacks that would consume every news cycle in America. His family had planned a public vigil to keep his case visible, scheduled for the anniversary of his disappearance. That vigil was September 11, 2001. The day it was scheduled to happen, the Twin Towers fell. Zachary's case was swallowed entirely by the national tragedy. Media coverage evaporated. Tips stopped coming in. The case went cold in the worst possible way, not because investigators stopped caring but because the country's attention was pulled somewhere else entirely and never came back. Years later a tip emerged claiming Zachary had been buried in a specific wooded area near Jacksonville. The location was described with enough specificity that investigators deployed ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. The search found nothing. Zachary Bernhard would be 32 years old now. The case remains open. When police were finally notified that 2 boys had walked out of Paxton Middle School in Jacksonville, they classified them as runaways. Not missing children. Not missing under suspicious circumstances. Runaways. That single classification decision determined everything that followed. No Amber Alert was issued. No urgent press conference was called. No saturation media coverage went out in the critical hours when the trail was still fresh and witnesses still remembered what they had seen. 2 boys were added to a list and investigators waited for them to turn up on their own. They never did. Mark Degner was 12 years old. Brown hair, hazel eyes, a thick southern accent that made him immediately recognizable to anyone who heard him speak. He had developmental delays and was enrolled as a special needs student at Paxton Middle School in Jacksonville. He was best friends with Brian Hayes, and that friendship was the kind forged between kids who understand what it means to feel different from everyone around them. Brian Hayes was 13. Bright red hair, brown eyes, the kind of coloring that stands out in a crowd and does not disappear easily from memory. He had a scar on the left side of his torso. He had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and lived not at home but at Daniel House, a residential group home for children with emotional and behavioral challenges. He was mentally younger than his age in the way that matters most. He was trusting, he was easy to reassure, and he did not have the instincts that tell most people when a situation has turned dangerous. On the afternoon of February 10, 2005, at approximately 1:30 p.m., the 2 boys executed a plan. One of them created a disturbance in their special education classroom, drawing the teacher's attention. While that was happening, the other slipped out of the room. They met in the hallway, ran across the school grounds, past the baseball fields, and headed toward the street. Multiple students witnessed them leaving. And then they were gone. The school did not immediately contact police. There was uncertainty about whether the boys had simply wandered off temporarily and would come back. Mark's mother was not notified until he failed to get off the school bus that afternoon, hours after he had already left the building. Brian's mother was not notified until the following day, because the communication chain between Paxton Middle School and Daniel House had broken down somewhere along the way. By the time law enforcement was fully mobilized and treating this with genuine urgency, the window that matters most in any missing child case had already closed. The runaway label made everything worse. 2 boys with developmental disabilities, no money, no food, no plan, and no capacity to navigate independently on the streets of a city covering over 800 square miles, classified as voluntary runaways. The question no one seems to have asked loudly enough at the time was how long children like Mark and Brian could realistically survive alone before something found them. Unconfirmed reports placed the boys getting into a gray car not long after they left the school grounds. Those reports were never fully investigated before the witnesses' memories had faded to the point where the details could no longer be reliably acted upon. The scenario is consistent with what investigators call a compliant abduction, where victims go willingly with someone because they do not possess the tools to recognize that the situation has become dangerous. Two confused, vulnerable boys walking alone in the middle of the day represented exactly the kind of opportunity that a predator would recognize and act on quickly. Years later, a specific tip came in claiming the boys had been buried in a wooded area near Jacksonville. The information was credible enough that investigators deployed ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs to the location. The search found nothing. Mark Degner and Brian Hayes would be 32 and 33 years old now. 20 years have passed since they walked out of that school door in front of witnesses and disappeared into the sprawl of Jacksonville. There have been no confirmed sightings. No physical evidence has ever been recovered. No arrests have ever been made. Mark's mother still posts age progression images on social media showing what he might look like today, still hoping that someone somewhere will recognize a face. 10 cases. 1 state. Decades of unanswered questions. A fence post covering a face in every frame. A convenience store that no camera ever confirmed. A cinder block propping a back door open in the middle of the night. A federal judge who called law enforcement transcripts pure fantasy. A window screen cut from the inside of a child's room. A dying man who knew about a scar that was never made public. 2 unidentified fingerprints on a door handle at a remote beach parking lot. A boat that came home with the engines running and nobody at the wheel. An unlocked apartment door at 4 o'clock in the morning. A runaway label placed on 2 boys who had no ability to survive on their own. The institutional failures in these cases are as significant as the disappearances themselves. No background checks on workers with access to a building. A deputy who lied under oath and was never charged with a crime. A police department that shaped transcripts around a conclusion rather than evidence. A school that waited hours before alerting anyone. A legal process that ordered a grieving mother to pay the man she believes took her son. Most of these cases remain officially open. Most of these families are still waiting. Most of these questions have no answer. If you have information relating to any of the cases covered in this documentary, contact the relevant law enforcement agencies directly. These investigations remain active and tips continue to be accepted. This has been a documentary investigation into 10 of Florida's most disturbing disappearances. Every name, every date, every piece of evidence presented here is drawn from verified public records, official law enforcement documentation, and confirmed reporting. These cases deserve to be remembered. These families deserve answers. And this channel will continue covering them for as long as those answers remain out of reach.